I see you're getting into practice here. Well, that's good. Well, great to be here with you again. Did you enjoy Newcastle and Kirkwall? All right. Well, we're going farther into the deep north, and Iceland, which is a remarkable place. I'll show you what I can of it. I first sailed in here some 30 years ago when I was crew on a little ship called the Lindblad Explorer. We were an ice-class ship and spent 5 months of the year going around the polar ice cap, around Greenland, the Northwest Passage, and other lovely leisure resorts. And all I can say, if you work in the polar regions, the ship did the same thing in Antarctica for the northern winter. Well, the more you're in these polar regions, the less you feel the cold. And of course, the tropics get a little steamy then, but we are making this passage across the North Atlantic to Iceland, which is a world unto itself in a way, because it is between the continents of Europe and North America. But above all, it's on the mid-Atlantic ridge. It's the only major island that is right on this great fissure of the continental plates, just the mid-Atlantic ridge is a mountain canyon that is all the way from the Arctic down to Antarctica. It's the world's largest geographical feature in length, and it's very deep and it's spreading. In fact, the Atlantic Ocean spreads by almost 1 centimeter a year, so that every time you cross the Atlantic, notice it gets a bit broader. Well, anyway, this is a very active volcanic area because of the crack in the crust of the earth, so that Iceland is a product of volcanic activity to this day. And you can actually stand on one bridge, I'll show you, be on both sides of the geographical divider. But Iceland is rugged, and in many ways it's comparable, let's say, to the big island of Hawaii, being again on a volcanic hotspot and constantly creating new land. Now, if they only took Iceland 1,000 miles south, it might have palm trees. But meanwhile, what it does have is a lot of fjords, bays. The white are the great glaciers. Vatnajökull is the largest one. We'll see some outside of Reykjavik there on the west coast of Iceland. Then we're going to sail around the points of land to Akureyri in the far north. And we will, for a short time, actually go in above the Arctic Circle and be in the Arctic as we go on our way to Norway. Now, Iceland is actually remarkably green, except in the winter when it looks like this to its name. And of course, Greenland is mostly ice, so they really should have changed names once upon a time, but they call Greenland green so that other Vikings would go there thinking that they were going to Florida or something like that. But here it is in its winter grip. Of course, we're here in high summer, and of course the sun has come out to greet us. Well, this classification of the climate, actually, they do have tundra, they do have frozen areas, and then particularly in the summer, it gets mild enough so that you have pastures and habitable places. So you wonder, why did people come here? Well, this is the story of the Vikings and their exploration of the world. This is the symbol of the country now and the national emblem, with the brought-in animals of the sheep and the cattle came with the Vikings from Scandinavia. Now, we're going to be continuing back to Norway and Denmark, so that's the heart of Scandinavia, where the Vikings all came from. These were the medieval era settlements, all these places where they would leave and then, as you said, invaded Britain and France and all the way down to the Mediterranean. So of all of the empires of the world, this is perhaps the most unusual in that it was always done by sea and not a marching army. It was always raiders that came in, and then they made settlements, and then they would trade back to the old countries, being in Sweden, Norway, Denmark. They were master boat builders and navigators. And just briefly, they built shallow draft boats that could land on beaches, go up rivers, but still take the full sea with sail and navigate across the oceans. And this is just old illustrations of what it looked like back then. But the name Viking in Old Norse means viking, which means, it's actually a verb. Vik is a bay, and Viking is to go from bay to bay around points of land. So this is an example of kind of the voyaging spirit that the Scandinavians had at the time. And they had already crossed to Britain, they had already crossed to the Faroe Islands, and they just kept going, and then they found Iceland. So this is Ingolfur Arnason in 873, landing in where it is now Reykjavik. And he called the city the Smoking Bay because Reka means steam. And this is what we'll see when we're there, that there are volcanic steam vents and, of course, hot water freely available in Reykjavik, we'll see. But they settled on this little bay, which was sheltered enough from the bigger seas, and set up their first settlements that were typical Scandinavian turf roof, timber, and often subterranean buildings. So they have a number that are still like that out in the far countryside, some that are recreated as an example of how life was when you first landed on these shores. Now, this is not the way most people live these days with modern conveniences. It's a very modern country now, but you can imagine how tough the life was here, the icy turf, the long, long winters. But they were from Norway mostly, and they were used to that, and this was on the same latitude. So they brought their iron tools, they brought their sheep, the cattle, and in waves they started to settle Iceland as a new territory. So here's a modern Icelandic family who are particularly healthy people. The life expectancy in Iceland is among the highest in the world, mainly because of the diet. A lot of fish, a lot of protein, cheese, and a few other snacks, bread. But of course, what does a Viking or Scandinavian parent never say to his children? Eat your vegetables, because they don't have any. Now, they had little herbs and things, but there was actually minerals or rather the kind of nutrition from vegetables was not really known. But they were nonetheless very strong and hardy because of all the protein they ate. Well, the stories of the settlement of the settlements and then of Iceland are kept and taught in the sagas. And this is our historical reference to these people. And these were written at the time, usually on vellum or parchment, before they didn't have paper, and then later they were transcribed. They tell of the families that came over, the clans, the conflicts, and then the adventures that then led to founding Iceland. Many of them came up from Ireland, and they are mixed with some of the Irish blood, but many of them are red-haired, freckled, and such. But the clan structure remains to this day such that you get a first name, a family name rather, from your father or mother. So you're named Ingrid's daughter. That's your name, your legal family name, or Stefan's son, or like John's son. Those are just you're named after your male or female progenitors, and then those names are kept in a long line of genealogy. But that's why you'll see these names, they always end in son or daughter of. And that's the tradition here that is maintained over 1,000 years. Well, they also made these large ceremonial communal houses. Here's one recreated also with the byre, meaning where they kept the cattle and the sheep in the winter, the ceremonial hall, and then the living room where everybody lived in one big room together. And sociologists have said this is one reason why the Scandinavians are so communally oriented and family oriented, is they actually traditionally always lived in one room together. And then these houses would have, you see the top of them on the roof ridge. It's sort of built like an inverted boat, the whole thing. But those are the what they call the eye of the wind, the vind, which is where the smoke from the fires would go out. That's where we get our name, window. So they came across from Norway to the Faroe Islands, Iceland. They went down to found Dublin, and of course they settled somewhat in Britain. But above all, the ones that went farther afield to Iceland continued on to Greenland and then to North America. And so this is one of the great subjects of the sagas and then current archaeological work, because it was unbelievable that in a small open boat with a dozen or so people, you would go for thousands of miles, know where you were, and also go all the way back to tell about it. So the question is how did they navigate? Now, this is the simplest of called latitude navigation, where you have Polaris, the North Star in the sky, and you can mark it with the pointing stars of the Big Dipper, and you know at that point where your latitude is because of the angle of that. And they had solar, what they call a sun compass with a pole that would cast a shadow if they had enough sunlight. They also had a crystal stone that could see the sun through the fog. But mostly they just used this latitude sailing. So they would pick a star, a zenith star that they could follow at sea when the sky was clear at night, and then they would follow that line across to other lands, and then they would follow it back. So from Bergen, you would go all the way to Greenland. Other parts, you'd come to Iceland. Further south, you would know your latitude. Now, longitude was not known. That was done by estimation and keeping a log, so the distances at sea were uncertain. But nonetheless, that's how they came to Iceland. And Eric the Red was followed shortly after Arneson. He was accused of a murder in Norway, and so he came over to Iceland, and then he settled in his own area. He was a hot-headed fellow, obviously, because he got into more trouble fighting with his neighbors over territory. They also had slaves at the time. They called them the thrall, which were mostly Irish or Celtic people they captured in their raids in the British Isles. But Eric, his homestead is still there on the south coast of Iceland, and he had a son who was also accused of getting involved in some fight, and he was judged that either he would be punished by getting thrown into this crevice, which was the way they killed or executed people, or he could pack up and move, and that's when he decided we're going to go farther and across the seas following the zenith star and see if they found land. And then in 891, they ended up going to Greenland and setting up that colony. And then Leif continued on to the western lands, which it's not quite known where they landed first, but this is the story of Leif and then Thorfinn Karlsevne, another one of these leaders of the longboats who landed in what is now North America, Labrador, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, maybe down the coast somewhat. This is a stone that was dug out in Iceland that seems to be a map. Now the red has been etched or has been colored in, but the etchings are latitudes and other markings with the faint trace of the shoreline. As we know, that's the UK and then France and parts of North America. This side is Labrador down to Newfoundland and other parts not quite clear, but this was probably used to train young sailors that if you follow this latitude, you will come to this place. And of course, this is a wide and wild world. If they did go from the settlements that are there in Greenland, they went down what they call Markland, that's now Labrador. Vinland, well, that's not sure where that is. The St. Lawrence Seaway, River area, Nova Scotia, and perhaps down to Cape Cod. It's thought that they might have gone that far because they found that area warm and full of vines, meaning wild grapes, which only grow up to about Cape Cod area of New England. But why didn't they stay? Well, it's probably because they had bad relations with what they call the Skrælings, or the savages, which were the people, native peoples who eventually opposed them for whatever reason, and whatever small settlements of a few of them were probably wiped out. But there was a young lad named Snorri, who was the son of Thorfinn, who was the first European born in the Americas. But he made it back to Iceland and was then registered as having come from this wild land where they couldn't stay. There was also a little ice age in the 12th century which froze up much of northern Europe and perhaps meant that they couldn't survive in the rough northern conditions. Well, nonetheless, this map survives from that era, said to be a copy of earlier maps of the Norse, the Vinland map, 1434, and you can see up in the upper right-hand corner the markings for the North American continent and where the Norse knew there was land. Now, this is now in Yale Library. But they built these kind of houses. Now, this is the recreation of the excavation in Anso-Meadow in northern Newfoundland. They just found another site in southern Newfoundland, which is the foundations for these turf houses with their windows, doors, ceremonial rooms, blacksmith shops. So when they found the iron, they knew that this was Norse. There was no iron smelting in North America before the Norse came, the Vikings came, and they've again found similar the Smitty shop in another part of Newfoundland, so they may continue to find more as time goes on. But these are the recreated houses at Anso Meadow. This is in Greenland. There are extensive sites in Greenland of certain places where the Vikings certainly had their settlements, but they all eventually left and went back to Iceland. So there's no continuance of the settlement until, of course, modern times. But back in Iceland, the community was organized on a clan and chieftain basis that had this site, Althing, which literally means the parliament or the Congress in our terms nowadays, which met first in 930 AD to decide how to settle land disputes, how to provide legal process. But as one of the visitors from Europe wrote about them shortly thereafter, said, this is a land with no king. They have law instead of royalty. And they call the leader and the sort of the speaker of this parliament the logsagara, which means the law speaker who could recite the laws, read them, and then they would agree to new agreements. This is a site you can visit today. It's on the many of the excursions right out of Reykjavik, and this is a kind of a volcanic cleft that provided a natural amphitheater for a gathering. This is said to be the oldest assembled parliament in the world and one of the origins of modern democracy. Well, once this was a known world, this is a map of 1579, which shows the Norse territory, the extended Scandinavia. That's the Icelandic flag when it was raised on its own independently. But the Norwegian coast is on the right side of the old chart. You can see the ice up there, and then Greenland, the Faroe Islands, the Shetland Islands, the Orkney Islands, and then again, Helleland, Markland, Skrælingland. That's North America. Now, this is long after other Europeans had come to the Caribbean now, but the search for the passage to the northwest to get to Asia was this kind of a map is what impelled people to go there and try to find a way through this icy waters to get a shortcut to Asia. Well, then this is a little more geographically accurate, but again, you can see the green at the top is the Arctic ice cap, which is depicted as land. Of course, a lot of the land is always covered in ice anyway, so it was perhaps presumed that there was actual land under all the ice. Again, Greenland and Iceland and other parts of North America are on this later map of Scandinavia. But this is a world unto itself for those who are hardy enough to live here. Now Iceland has volcanoes, glaciers, lush pastures, hot geysers, but a lot of it is very inhospitable. It's very hard to grow any crops. The winter is long and dark. There's, of course, the great industry around here was fishing, and into now the fishing has been so abundant that's been the largest economic resource of Iceland. But there are farms. I believe there's a farm visit on a tour where you get, or some horseback riding, certainly, I think out of Akureyri, where you can see the lovely Icelandic ponies that are sort of dwarf and very sturdy for carrying loads and carrying people. But notice this horse has a blue eye. And there's not other wildlife. There are sheep, though. There are no reindeer or bears other than polar bears to the north. But the one indigenous endemic mammal is the Arctic fox. Now, this is common all around the Arctic area, and they ride the ice floes, and they spread around, and they search for the moles and the weasels and bird eggs and things like this. So they're not endangered, but they're very hard to spot, because in the winter they have a white coat. Then in the summertime they turn blue, and then a bit brownish to meld in with the rocks and what little vegetation there is. And so here's one taking a little nap. Curiously, they roll up into a ball, and they'll actually dig themselves a little burrow in the snow to have their pups, and they come out in the spring. but it's a land of ice, and so we are here at the height of summer. Actually, today's the beginning day of summer, and so some of what people come to is to see the great landscape when it is not all iced in, and so it gets covered with a green moss, not that many trees or vegetation, sort of like the Orkneys. It's too hard in the winter for any larger plants to grow. But then the ground erupts, and there's a great amount of heat in the ground that causes geysers to spew. We'll see a few in our trip in Reykjavik. This is the southern coast of Iceland with the Eyjafjallajökull. Now we can all say that together. It means the eagle feather glacier. And the Mýrdalsjökull is the largest one, but the Eyjafjalla glacier was the one that erupted a number of years ago. And these are all closely monitored because they have a great deal of effect. There are earthquakes spewing, and of course this particular event created an incredible ash cloud which impacted in Europe. Now you can go up and see when they're not that active. This is the great Mid-Atlantic rift near there that is the spreading continents, and this is getting wider. And again, there's a bridge you can go over it to say that you walk from one continent to the other. Not a long way, but this is, if you're a geologist, this is a fantasy land to come up. And again, people are drawn to these eruptions and great geological phenomena, but it can get quite dangerous. This is Eyjafjalla when it went up about 6 years ago, I believe, and that ash cloud covered all of Europe, and you may remember they canceled all the air flights for fear of damage to airplanes. And so that is a ever-present danger in Iceland. This was a particularly large eruption. And you can see people have their farmhouses right below these and just waiting for it to happen, but it can be pretty terrifying. Some of them go right through the ice cover, creating these great ice caverns. And again, some of them you can go hiking through, but that's a pretty dangerous sport, I'd say. And then there are the new islands that are being built. This is right near Eyjafjallajökull, that is on the south coast near a town called Vestmann, where the lava came out of the mountain and then poured into the sea and is now creating a series of new islands. So all of those ones are only maybe 10 years old, and the lava fills up, cools, becomes a rock, and then the birds come, and then it begins to settle with a bit of life. They're all now under research restriction. You can't go out and land on them because they want to see how an island gets colonized by life once it appears from the sea. But this goes on, and it's quite a... there is a Helga volcano is now under an eruption alert this week, so we may actually get to see some of this if we're not too close. But here's, again, one of them eruptions coming to a homestead that then got completely covered over with the volcanic ash. Now, this is not uncommon in other parts of the world, but this is sort of the daily trouble of Iceland. And again, people go up to research it. It's a dangerous pursuit sometimes. But there you have the ice and the snow together, which is the drama of Iceland. And if you dare, you can go take a ride over it, but it's, again, unpredictable land. Now we're going to go into Reykjavik here on the west coast of Iceland. That's the city emblem. And this is the largest city of the nation. There are only 350,000 people about in the whole island of Iceland, and about 150 of them live in the city of Reykjavik and its surrounding area. So this is a fairly flat land and settled in different quarters. We're going to be sailing in and docking at the pier in the upper left-hand corner, the cruise pier, and then from there there'll be a shuttle into the right downtown square. But this is not a very big place. You can walk around the center city fairly readily, and you may not get to the outside areas, but it's been a small town for a long time, and it grew mostly during World War II when Iceland was held by the British to keep the Germans from taking it, and became a major air base, the Keflavik air place just south of Reykjavik. And so it grew from what was a fishing village and a small capital into a larger city. But it's always been a modest place, let's say, but proud. Now it looks like this with outlying areas, and people are fairly prosperous. It's said to be the Icelanders have the highest literacy and reading rate of any population in the world. And so they, of course, have a long winter to study, but they themselves, for so few people, publish more books per capita than any other nation. And so we'll be in the top of the picture in the cruise harbor up there, and then you can wander around the neighborhoods in the downtown. It's fairly bright and very cheerful this time of year. And as we heard, it will not get dark until around midnight, and then it gets sort of a twilight. It doesn't really get dark at all in the winter here. We're not quite to the Arctic Circle where we would get the midnight sun, but it's close enough. And so even in the midnight, you can go out, and shops may not be open, the clubs are. There's a considerable music and nightlife in Reykjavik in the summertime, in the nighttime. And there are some classical churches and a few older buildings. It's not really a great historical town because there were no castles and no ancient monuments. But this is the current Althingshus, which is the Parliament House. So it's an active democracy still. And there's a lot of little cafes, parks, shops all through the downtown. In one of the hotels right off this square, they have a basement museum, because as they dug the hotel, they found a Viking-era settlement. And so you can walk into the hotel and take an elevator down and see the excavations that have been there to see. You'll see it's called the Viking Museum right downtown. This is the Torjö, which is the lake in the middle of town. So that's sort of a pleasant walk around that in the parkland right near downtown. But this building over on the west side of the northwest side of the city is the famous church called the Hallgrímskirkja, which is built in 1937 and looks like a spaceship to me. That's Leif Erikson in the statue there, but this building was designed by a Icelandic architect, Gunnar Sodersham, who designed it after the volcanic and basalt formations of the country. And so he modeled it as a rising spiritual center. It's a Lutheran church. It's not a cathedral, it's just a church, but it is a real emblem of Reykjavik and Iceland. And I just show it to you because if you don't get to see it, it's quite a remarkable structure, sort of bundled together, stone rising up to this great steeple, which has little windows on it so that it actually emits light all through the church. And it's quite an engineering accomplishment that it is so high and so, let's say, almost Gothic in its fluting. But it's very plain at the same time. In Scandinavia, they're not very ornamentally oriented, but this is the interior. It almost has a look like the Gaudi Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. But this is finished. And so this is a view over the rest of, has a view of the rest of the harbor and the city, and you can go up in the observation tower up there. And then they use it in the winter as a projection screen in the Winter Light Festival. So the Icelanders say, oh, well, the summer we usually have to work a lot with the farms and the travelers and all the business. In the winter they have, in the dark, they have all kinds of festivals and events and a lot of theater and such. But this is what they do with this particular church. And but I'm not sure whose eye that is. Well, anyway, this is an example of how much fun they have anyway. Well, Reykjavik goes out into these different districts. I won't describe them, except that to the north is Grímsstaðir, where the Great Blue Lagoon is. Now, this is, again, on a number of the tours. This is the world's largest thermal baths, and it's curious because you see the thermal power plant behind it, which actually pulls boiling hot water from lava seams in the deep ground. And then what they had is they would generate steam for the electricity. So, Reykjavik and the rest of Iceland needs no oil. They have it all underground in the form of latent heat. And they have mastered the technology to create electricity from it, then also have free hot water in all the homes. And then this was a byproduct that they had a pool where their excess water would be contained, and then all the local people came and started swimming in it. And then they realized, well, this is a great attraction. They have other pools like this around the city of Reykjavik. You can go out, and any neighborhood has a small one, but this is the world's largest, where they've expanded it out and given it this broad pool and have a center to change and restaurants and such. The water has a certain silicate in it, such that it always has that kind of creamy blue color, and that's the volcanic dissolve in this hot water, and then they actually have to clear it out. It precipitates almost like a sand that they then clean out every year. But otherwise, it's a medicinal bath, and they've been researching this kind of water versus other kind of mineral waters to see which are the best for arthritis or rheumatism or just a bad mood in the winter. But anyway, this is a great place to go and have a hot bath with everybody. There's also tours to the other thermal plants. They're all over Iceland again, and so this means that this country is actually, let's say, energy independent. Therefore, it does not spend its earnings like other countries do for oil or coal, and so that's one reason why Iceland is one of the, per capita, one of the most prosperous countries in the world. And it's all around the edges, mainly, because the interior is very rugged with these rift valleys and then ice fields and great pools of bubbling mud and such. But we're going to sail up and around and go to Akureyri, up there where the red is. And then Grimsey Island is the red dot up there. Now, I'll show you Grimsey. That's the little island for which there's an airborne excursion up there. I'll show you two in a minute. But Akureyri, which is the second largest town in Iceland, about 50,000 people, is tucked into a deep fjord. And the reason we go up there, you see there's a green valley and then up into the highlands. So this is, again, an adventure ashore to go out into the countryside and see these natural features of Iceland. Akureyri was just a fishing port originally. So that was the access out to the Arctic. And to this day, you'll see fishing boats that are going out for a month at a time up to fish for the catch up in the far, far north. But the city's sort of nestled in this valley, so it's fairly protected from the winter gales and any of the ice flows. And so it's a very pleasant but a small town. Again, you could walk around it. There are some excursions to the gardens and the museum and then out to the farms. And curiously, it is the most northern cruise port in the world. I mean, we are 50 miles from the Arctic Circle, and then perhaps when there'll be more melting, there'll be Club Med in Greenland or something. But meanwhile, this is about as far north as you can get without getting it into an ice-class ship and taking a true polar expedition. But again, this was a very simple town, mostly fishing, and then a very cheerful and warm populace. That unlike that big city of Reykjavik, let's say, it's about 4 or 5 roads either way, and then here you are. So it's in the summer, of course, it's everybody's out enjoying the sun while it lasts here, and typical urban townhouses and things like this are around the town. Schools, so it's of some curiosity, but no great castles or monuments to wonder about. But it's a proud place as the most northern city in the world other than Murmansk, Russia. So here's some bit of the fleet. And that reminds me of the story of the fishermen who go out with their net and they toss it in and they think they're going to pull up a whole bunch of fish. But what do they catch? A merman. And he comes up screaming at him, "How dare you catch me?" And then the fisherman says, "Well, we caught a merman." And he says, "If you don't let me go, I'm going to tell you the truth." "What do you mean you're going to tell us the truth?" "I'm going to tell you all the truth you do not want to hear." And as they bringing the merman fighting in his net back to shore, he says, your brother is lying to you, your neighbor has stolen your sheep, your daughter is this, and the government, and finally they throw them overboard because they don't want to hear the bad news. And this became a saying in Icelandic, especially when the financial crisis crashed their banks a few years ago. In the paper it was said, the headline was, the merman screams, der merman skrekt is the saying. So don't go fishing for mermen. But anyway, here's the island off of Akureyri, the Grimsey Island, which is, again, the remainder of a volcanic island that is now etched in these dramatic cliffs. And people go out there, you see there's a landing strip and a small harbor with a few dozen people live on the island year-round, but it is mainly visited because it has the most birds of any island in this whole area. Over 1 million birds nest here in the summer. And so if you go out there, you go out and walk on the cliffs or take small boats around, and you get to see more birds than you can ever count. So these are guillemots. They are sort of like a cormorant. They're a seabird that'll go diving for their fish, but roost in these great colonies packed up on these high ledges. A few gulls, and then the most populous of birds are the guillemots. There's other kinds, but the most famous one, though, is the puffin. This is the Atlantic puffin, the symbol of the North Sea. And there are other Pacific puffins with a crest and a different look to them, but these are the cutest birds you'll ever want to climb a cliff for. They mate for life and keep one nest for their whole life. And then they go off and fish at sea. But they have also been hunted. They are considered a delicacy in Iceland. Now, the government's been trying to protect them, but there are millions of them up here. And they're so cute you wouldn't want to have it for dinner. But meanwhile, the puffin has the rare ability to hold its catch in its beak, and then they'll offer you some. Oh, so cute. Well, this is the emblem of the bird of the north. It's quite a cute wonder. And then, but this is the rest of Iceland, especially in the winter. It is just gripped. And so if we leave Akureyri, we'll go back and see some of this rough land and some of the sights. But here's the Grella River that goes up from Akureyri up to where there are the farms, and then the great Godafoss waterfall. Now, I know there's some excursions there, too. And these are not so high, but they're very broad, and then you can hike all around them, and they're said to be the site where the local Icelandic chieftains came to throw their effigies of Norse gods into the waterfall when they converted to Christianity. And they're sort of like a mini Niagara Falls up here, but in a very remote place and very wild up there above Akureyri. And of course, in the winter, it's even more beautiful. Brr. Well, another trip. Because in the winter, as I said, in Iceland, they go skiing like this all night long. I mean, there's only 1 or 2 hours of daylight here in the middle of the winter. So they enjoy it anyway and are very, let's say, sociable and community-minded, family-minded people. So we'll feel quite at home, especially if you meet the local trolls. Now, these are the spirits that lived under the ground, sort of like the leprechauns, but they're there guarding every T-shirt shop now to make sure you get 3 for $1. And of course, the Viking tradition goes on in other places in other ways. Anybody from Minnesota? Yes, sir. All right. Well, there we go. That's where, and yeah, at least they're not called the Puffin team, right? Well, anyway, I'm going to talk more about Norway and more of the Norse traditions on our way to Bergen, Norway. But I just put this up so you get familiar with this world that was created by the Vikings. The main flag in Norway, then from the left to right, that's Denmark, Sweden, Finland. Anybody can guess the smaller ones? From the left to the right, that's Greenland, Faroe Islands, Iceland, and this is the island of Åland in the Baltic Sea, which is an independent island between Sweden and Finland. And the Orkneys have a flag similar to that, except that they're part of Scotland and the UK. Well, anyway, this confederation is still alive, and the Vikings are still here. And I showed a few men, so I'm going to show a few women, the strong Scandinavian, especially Icelandic women who let's say, can be in charge when the men are away and be in charge when the men are there, too. This was the former president, Vigdis Finnbogadóttir. She was, in 1980, elected the first woman as president of a European country, and she's still around as an advisor to the country. And then there are other representatives of Ireland. You may know Björk, the multifarious singer and theatrical performer. So she's the famous around the world now. And so these women are particularly strong-minded. And I'm going to tell you another Scandinavian joke about the man who comes back to the house, and the woman says, "You didn't tend the sheep, you didn't do this," and she picks up the spoon and starts chasing around the house, and "You come and get the thrashing you deserve." And the man jumps under the table, and he says, "I'm the man in this house, and I will not come out and get the thrashing I deserve." Well, anyway, here's one of the designers of a rather summery dress. And so this is the way of the world here. So I leave you with a little Hagar here. If you plan to marry a Viking, be aware that your wants will be different from his wants. Have you heard this before? Oh, well, there you go. You'll want to buy a house, he'll want to buy a boat. Well, as a sailor, why can't you have both? Oh, tomorrow's my anniversary. I better call home. But anyway, what's the difference between a house and a boat? Well, a house may be comfortable, but on a boat you can go a lot of different places. And of course, the best ships you'll meet at sea are your new friendships. Well, with that, I'm going to wish you skål. Oh, I don't have a drink here, but with a Norse saying in Iceland, they say it too, is "Spriten döder langsam, men vem fan har bråttom." Liquor kills slowly, but who's in a hurry? Oh, skål. There we go. Yeah, it's ancient humor. Very, very old. Well, as it is June 21st and the beginning of summer, I'm just going to mention that I've been working on a project called Solstice 2016. And of course, we're out here in the sea with the beautiful sun right now, and the weather gods are looking down on us very well. And, when you're out at sea, you see more sun than you'll ever see in the mountains even, particularly on a clear sky to the west. So we've been organizing a international celebration online that is global with the 24-hour time zones around the world, each uploading music and celebrations and poetry and news and things like that. It's actually just started. It's just happening all day long. Started in the Pacific at the International Dateline, working its way hour by hour at happy hour, 5 to 6 p.m. and every hour, and then coming here, and we'll have some broadcasts from Iceland. It's being sponsored by the International Planetarium Society, the Smithsonian Institution, and numerous national television and radio stations. It's called The Day the Sun Stood Still, which is the sun stands up and then it begins its retreat into the winter. So you can look it up today, Solstice 2016, and that's a global online celebration. It particularly features from NASA the first broadcast of the live video feed of the series of satellites that are watching the sun for the Solar Observatory. And so it's now on display at the Museum of Air and Space in Washington, D.C., but on this event, it's the first time they're getting the feed to be broadcast around the world. This is a large wall in Washington that has this, and these are live pictures, so it's sort of the sun up close. You can stare at it and see the activity that we all live by with this tremendous star of our very own. So that's something you can go back to your suite and take a look at what's going on the sun today. But meanwhile, night falls in Akureyri and we will sail on, and their pleasure in the winter, when we're not in the high summer, is this, the great aurora borealis, which is charged solar radiation onto the magnetic field, emits light in certain particles, and that is the great wintertime display here. Now you have another reason to come back to Iceland in the depth of winter, because it's truly an amazing sight. I've seen it numerous times, and it's all, I don't have a film because it's hard to catch on film, but it does float around and swirl around in the sky, and that is one of the great phenomena of the whole Arctic area. And in Iceland, it is a national sport to sit outside and watch it when it's in full view. And so, with that, I wish you have a great time in Iceland and have all the adventures you can. Thank you very much, and bon voyage.